For months, Europeans have been planning strategies to deal with Donald Trump at this week's NATO summit. And it turns out the president almost didn't go.
I was very disappointed with NATO, and frankly, if it weren't held in Turkey, where my friend happens to be a very strong leader, a very strong person, it's possible that I wouldn't have attended. I felt I had to attend because of the fact that, I know he's gone all out.
Turkish President Erdogan picked up on that theme of a strong leader when he talked about Trump himself.
The fact that we are meeting here today for the NATO Ankara summit and that all the leaders are arriving and have arrived, and we will be executing the NATO summit tomorrow with the presence of President Trump, which will be adding might and strength to our summit.
And 2 days earlier, on Independence Day, another world leader singled out Donald Trump and the role of the United States. Russian President Vladimir Putin spent 85 minutes on the phone with President Trump. And that call has more to do with reality than all the European posturing in Ankara. Erdogan and Putin understand something European leaders and Mark Carney don't. And by the end of this video, you will too. I'm Susan Kokinda, and I've tracked British imperial management of American foreign policy for decades. Here's what I'm going to cover today. First, how Trump's visit to Turkey signals a new set of rules for foreign policy. Second, how Carney and the Europeans walked themselves into a dead end. And third, the importance of Putin's phone call and how it points to the end of a century of geopolitics. So look at how Turkey greeted President Trump. First came the ginormous motorcade and mounted cavalry escort. And that was followed by President Erdogan standing with President Trump while cannons saluted the Star-Spangled Banner. Now, by contrast, EU head Ursula von der Leyen arrived in what looked like a Turkish Uber, and Canada's Mark Carney was greeted on the tarmac by Turkey's finance minister. Seeing the difference between the reception afforded to Trump and these others will make it easier to understand what really went on. Now, President Trump made some very precisely crafted statements about Turkey.
Turkey has been a great ally for us. Turkey could have gone on the side. They know Iran very well, and they know the problems with Iran. But they've been very instrumental, along with a couple of other countries, of helping. They could have gotten into, you hear some people say about their relationship with Israel. They could have gotten into the fight. They're a very powerful military nation. They didn't do that.
And he went on to put on the table the possibility of selling F-35 fighters to Turkey. That left everyone from Bibi Netanyahu to Mike Pence to the Wall Street Journal editorial board very unhappy. Now, Turkey has been prevented from such purchases since it went ahead back in 2017 and bought S-400 surface-to-air missile defense systems from Russia. Think of that, a NATO country buying from Russia. Erdogan has also maintained contact with both Moscow and Kiev, while the NATO alliance has demanded that instead he choose sides. I'm going to get back to the importance of that later. But all of this points to something important about Turkey under Erdogan, and why Donald Trump decided to go to the NATO summit to see him and not Ursula von der Leyen. Remember, Trump almost didn't come. Because unlike all other members of NATO, Turkey plays by its own rules. You don't have to like all of Erdogan's alliances or policies or his relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood. Donald Trump recognizes that he's dealing with a critical figure at a critical crossroads in Eurasia who is not playing by the rules of Britain's great game. And the fact that Turkey deals with both the United States and with Russia, and that Erdogan didn't play the expected role in backing Iran, has left the empire playing a game that's in the process of being rolled up. And that's why the Europeans and Mark Carney are showing up at the NATO summit looking very much like a group of backup singers, hustled up on the stage at the last minute to perform for a new superstar. Donald Trump is creating a new dynamic in the world, and it's the one that the game masters don't want you to see. Well, we want you to see it and understand it, which is why you should subscribe to Promethean Action's free newsletter. The link is in the description. So how did the Europeans prepare for this summit? On the eve of the NATO summit, the Wall Street Journal published a piece they'd been working on for months. They describe a secret marathon meeting in Brussels back in January, where nearly 30 European leaders debated well past midnight about whether America, the protector of Europe, had become a threat. But the man giving instructions wasn't even in the room. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, the central banker's central banker, had been messaging Europe's leaders from a British phone number left over from his London days, insisting that Europe had to deal with the fact that the old America isn't coming back. And that article even reports that MI6, Britain's intelligence service, has been providing profiles on how to manage Donald Trump. Now, the net result of all of this is that the Europeans have marched into the NATO summit with a splendid new defense posture, unveiled by EU head Ursula von der Leyen and NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte. They released it in a co-signed article in the London Economist, of course, and then in a press conference in Ankara. Rutte and von der Leyen declared that Europe is going to stand on its own without the United States. They said the era of outsourcing Europe's defense is over, and they used the new word of the day, resiliency. And they talk about the need for a stronger European defense industry that can produce at scale and speed. Now, Bloomberg's coverage of this kind of spills the beans on the real purpose of this, with a headline that reads, NATO agrees to $50 billion in defense spending to placate Trump. Maybe MI6 wrote that headline. But there's just one problem. Reality has already left Carney and the Europeans behind. And keep the real question in front of you. What do Erdogan and Putin see that these backup singers can't? Watch what happens when the resiliency slogan meets the real world. Conservative Treehouse captured the state of the German economy with this chart showing the collapse of German industrial production. And that collapse is only going to accelerate if Volkswagen's expected July 9th announcement delivers on the threat that 100,000 jobs will be cut and 4 plants will be closed down. And Great Britain, having shut down its longest virgin steel furnaces in 2024, is now down to a single plant which is on government life support. It could soon be the only G20 country that can't make its own virgin steel. The steel, by the way, that you need for warships and submarines. And Mark Carney, who's lecturing the world about the middle powers standing on their own, has just announced a prospective $20 to $30 billion submarine contract to Germany. So a deindustrializing Canada is buying submarines from a deindustrializing Germany. Talk about the mouse that roared. And at this summit, Carney also revealed what his middle power alliance actually amounts to: a bank. He launched the Defense, Security, and Resilience, there's that word again, Bank, which will be headquartered in Canada. The central banker's answer to a hollowed-out industrial base isn't a furnace or a shipyard. It's a lending facility. And Carney also established a new lending facility with Ukraine. So the financial architecture is going up, but the industry it's meant to serve is coming down. And how did they get here? Well, they did it to themselves. Carney's Globalism 2.0 still clings to the very policies, green energy, free trade, and open borders, which have already made their industries and their cultures disappear. That's the bankruptcy of Carney's middle powers. They announced that defense industrial production is the key to deterrence, the very week that VW announces massive layoffs and shutdowns. They're promising a war economy they no longer have the means to build. Which brings us back to the question we started with. What do Erdogan and Putin understand that Europe doesn't? President Trump is building a different set of alliances with nations that are intent on their own interests, and Turkey is one of those. Here's something else from that press conference. Asked about the Ukraine-Russia conflict, President Trump said it's going to get settled. And then he pointed to Erdogan, and he said,
You all work very well with both, and we're going to get it settled. And he's helping us get it settled, as he's helping with Iran.
So think about what's actually going on. You're watching the president restructure the geopolitical map. Nations act in their own interest, and Trump figures out how to deal with them, as they are, instead of everyone playing an imposed role in a world of perpetual division. And the biggest division of all, the one the entire system has been built around, has been keeping Russia at arm's length from the United States, which is what makes the July 4th phone call so important. Here's how Putin spokesman Yuri Ushakov described part of that discussion. Today's conversation between the two heads of state began with President Putin congratulating Donald Trump and the American people on their landmark holiday and recalling Russia's contribution to the development of American statehood. In this context, the presidents noted the importance of treasuring the historical heritage which our nations share. And that shared heritage has placed Russia on America's side against the British, starting with the Revolutionary War. It was Catherine the Great of Russia who organized the League of Armed Neutrality to break Britain's grip on the seas during the American Revolution. And when we fought the Civil War against the British-supported Confederacy, it was the Russian fleet that sailed into New York and San Francisco harbors in 1863 as a warning to London to not directly intervene. And when Russia set out to industrialize, it was the American system by name that Russia's finance minister Sergei Witte turned to. And that turn only deepened the British Empire's fear of Russia. It had marked Russia as a threat to its great game in Eurasia long before the Bolshevik Revolution. And there was more to that July 4th conversation between Trump and Putin that must have had the empire in a tizzy. Ushakov reported that the two presidents discussed the colossal potential for mutually beneficial cooperation between the two countries. And then they discussed the upcoming launch of a Russian-U.S. crew from Russia's Baikonur Space Launch Center as, quote, a specific example proving the two powers' interest in close cooperation across different fields. This is what the empire fears the most. Sovereign nations finding common ground in economic development, and especially in pushing the frontiers of human knowledge. Now go back to the collapsing economies of Carney's middle powers and their increasing irrelevance. That is what Erdogan understands. That is what Putin understands. A new world built on the American system and an American foreign policy that deals with nations as they actually are. For over 100 years, men who weren't in the room set the rules, keep nations weak and divided, and especially keep Russia and America apart. This week in Ankara, you watch those rules continue to fall apart. President Trump didn't fly to a NATO summit. He flew to see a leader who plays by his own rules. Putin didn't call to threaten. He called to remind us of a friendship the empire spent 2 centuries trying to erase. And the middle powers stood on a stage announcing a war economy they can no longer build. That's the shift, not more defense spending in a binary world of managed divisions. Instead, nations dealing with each other under the growing revival of American system economics. The backup singers on stage at Ankara can't or won't see it. But Promethean Action sees it and is fighting to advance it. And if you want to be part of that fight, go to our website and support us in any and every way that you can. This has been your Wednesday update. Thanks for watching.
Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at 𝓯𝓼𝓽𝓻𝓸𝓭𝓾.